A lot of discussion around at the moment about domestic violence, and rightfully so, with one woman dying every week in Australia as a result of it, and many children as well. What's often not discussed as part of this picture is our elderly and how they fit into the domestic violence picture. Sadly, it's something my next guest knows too much about, and that's because of its prevalence in our community. Kirsty Mackie is the chair of the Elder Law Committee at the Queensland Law Society, and she volunteers at the Suncoast Community Legal Centre. Kirsty, thanks for dropping by this morning. Lovely to catch up with you again.
Hi, Annie. Thanks for having me.
The Domestic Violence Report, Not Now, Not Ever, is widely talked about as the government's blueprint for tackling violence against women and children, but it also talks about elder abuse. What did it say?
It was interesting in that it nominated two target groups, mainly the elderly and the disabled, as particularly vulnerable to domestic violence. It also highlighted in their three recommendations the need for further education and awareness. In terms of that, it really means speaking out. It's still hidden. It's probably still one of the last taboos of our society, the abuse of our elderly. And to be quite frank, it's everyone's business, the abuse and neglect of our elderly. The interesting thing the report did highlight was the dramatic decrease in people over the age of 65 seeking protection by way of an order. The numbers were quite staggering. So anyone over 65, it was less than 1,000 over an 8-year period, sought the protection of an order. Domestic violence doesn't stop at 65 and turn into elder abuse. Domestic violence just changes. It's not so much physical. It takes the form of financial and psychological abuse, which are covered in the current legislation. So there is an avenue available for older people who are suffering this type of abuse, and you don't need to suffer physical violence to go and get the assistance of the courts or go and see a lawyer for some advice.
Where does elder abuse typically happen, in what setting?
90%, unfortunately, is perpetrated by a family member. It's primarily perpetrated in the home. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now is an increase in grandchildren being the perpetrators of the violence. And when I say violence, I mean financial and psychological abuse. In addition, there is an increasing factor of carers, paid carers, being the perpetrators of the violence. The difficulty with that is, and we've made submissions to the government to amend the legislation, is that the legislation only covers family and spousal relationships. These are paid carers who are actively targeting older people for financial gain, and you can't use the protection of the legislation to get an order in that regard. So as I said, the government recently did an inquiry. The Communities Disability and Family Violence Prevention Committee undertook quite a significant inquiry, and submissions were made in terms of amending the legislation as to the relevant relationship in the Act, so it would cover these paid carers, which are an increasing, they're seeing in the statistics, maybe 13-14% last year of reported incidences were undertaken by paid carers, which is a real concern.
It is, and I guess, certainly in environments like the coast, you have a lot of people who move here from down south, so their families are actually left behind in places like Victoria and New South Wales.
Yeah.
They come here, with their spouse, they retire, one partner dies, and then that person can become quite vulnerable, can't they? Because they don't have immediate family around them. They may rely on paid care and paid workers coming into their home to offer them the care that perhaps their family members might provide under other circumstances.
Also companionship, as you mentioned, the spouse has passed away, they're looking for other sources of companionship, so it's neighbours, it's paid carers, it's companions who are also perpetrating the abuse. And unfortunately, there's very little protection that the law provides for them. So we are still continuing to advocate for that amendment of that particular definition of relationship in the Act. So these people are covered, and people who are being abused by paid carers can obtain the protection of an order.
There's an elder abuse prevention unit that elderly people can call.
Yes.
What does this unit tell us in terms of the level of reporting? Is it actually growing?
It is. Last year, in the number of calls they took, 43% was financial abuse, closely followed by psychological abuse. They noted an increase of around 15 to 18%, I think, in the previous year of callers reporting abuse. In one way, it's a good sign, if you can say that the callers are increasing, because one of the biggest problems in this particular area is underreporting. More often than not, people are too ashamed. They come from a generation of stoic people who cope and don't want to disclose that they're undergoing violence in their own home. They also, as I said, don't recognise it's violence being perpetrated by a family member, having access to their finances strictly controlled. They see that as, oh, well, my husband or my wife used to do that, so my son doing it's just a continuation, and it's normalised behaviour, which is also a real barrier to reporting, is that they don't think there's anything wrong. And it's speaking out, it's having conversations like we're having now, it's having more community awareness, more education about it, that will stop that mentality of, oh, it's all right, it's been going on for a long time. It's actually not. It's a form of abuse, and there is something they can do about it.
Particularly heinous as far as I'm concerned. All of this violence is, but, you're elderly, you're vulnerable because of your age, maybe your infirmities, and you're infirm. For all of those reasons, I just think it's terrible preying behaviour. For people who are struggling, Kirsty, to understand how elder abuse is similar, in fact, to the kind of violence that women might experience, domestic violence as it's more widely known in relation to women. What can you tell me? What are the correlations between the violence here?
I mean, it all takes place in a family setting. It generally takes place by a partner or a family member. The abuse is, with domestic violence, the motivator is more control. With elder abuse, we're seeing it's more greed. So there is some difference, but it's all perpetrated by people who are loved and trusted in a trusting relationship. It's also very difficult to escape from, because the choice that a person, a younger person or an older person who's suffering this sort of violence has to make is, do they endure further violence and keep the family relationship intact, or do they choose to take a stand and take some action against the violence but completely destroy their family relationship? And I've had clients who've had to make that decision to protect themselves or to protect their relationship with their son and their daughter. It's a heartbreaking decision that anyone should never have to make, but in these circumstances, with domestic violence and with elder abuse, it's a very similar dynamic.
You believe that we're simply not taking the issue seriously enough yet, either through the legislation or through, our attitude as a community. Why not? Why don't we take it seriously?
I don't know. It's frustrating as a practitioner in the area that the government, quite rightly puts out some wonderful reports, some great recommendations, and I'm really heartened to see the Not Now, Not Ever recommendations being taken up. But there's some great recommendations in relation to elder abuse and guardianship laws and powers of attorney laws and potential amendments to the criminal code that just aren't being taken so seriously. The Victorian Powers of Attorney Act has just been amended on 1st of September, in fact, to criminalise the misuse of a power of attorney, and you're looking at up to 5 years in prison. I mean, that's a real step forward in terms of taking action for a very common form of financial abuse. Victoria is way ahead of the country in that regard. With their Royal Commission into Domestic Violence, their Seniors' Rights Victoria had a very strong presence in making submissions, and they seem very serious in progressing that, as does New South Wales, who's just announced a parliamentary inquiry into elder abuse in particular. So it's not so much that no one in Australia is recognising it. perhaps Queensland's a little bit slower than everyone else, which is a shame because the prevalence in Queensland is just the same as in New South Wales or Victoria.
No, some good news in this sense in that people can report to the Elder Abuse Prevention Unit, but also there may be an elder law clinic coming very soon to the Sunshine Coast through the Suncoast Community Legal Service. What can you tell me?
It's in its very early stages. It would be, I've volunteer with the Suncoast Community Legal Centre, and we're looking at creating a clinic during the day. Generally, the volunteer sessions run in the evening, but given the age bracket of the people that we're targeting, the daytime is a more convenient time.
Yes.
So we're looking at a fortnightly clinic to deal with any issues that arise, and it's not specifically elder abuse, but any particular issues that arise if you're over 60 and you can't get out quite easily to see a lawyer or you can't afford a lawyer. It just gives you an opportunity to get some advice, some information, a referral. Sometimes it's just a chat to make you feel better that what they're going through, it's validated. Yes, you have done the right thing and these are the things that you can do. And it empowers the older person in some way.
So if people are listening now and they might like to have a chat along those lines, let's give out some numbers, shall we, for the Elder Abuse Prevention Unit first off? Do we have that number handy, Kirsty, or perhaps I can look it up?
I've got the Suncoast
okay, so
number
let's start.
for you. So
Yep.
I can. So the Suncoast Community Legal Centre is just at Horton Parade in Maroochydore, and it's 5443 7827.
And I'll find out the other numbers in case anybody is listening and might prefer to go that way.
Yeah.
But really great to have you in here this morning and talking about this really important issue. And let's hope something changes.
Thanks, Amy.
That we do get those stricter pieces of, articles attached in the legislation to make sure that people outside the family, those carers that you were talking about, paid carers, neighbours, could be included in this. I'm really kind of, it upsets me to hear that grandchildren are taking advantage of their grandparents.
It's not a nice situation. I'll keep talking about it as long as anyone will keep listening. So thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Kirsty Mackie on ABC Sunshine Coast. And the number again for the Suncoast Community Legal Service is 5443 7827. That's 5443 7827, a elder law clinic in place there. And if you call that number, they'll give you all the details. If you missed any of that, you can use our number on 1300 903 222, and we'll pass on those details to you.